This podcast is recorded on the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam peoples.
British Columbia, I've seen your mountains high, seen your pretty rainbows and your blue crystal skies, watched your winding rivers as they flow around the bend. To me you're not a stranger, you'll always be a friend.
Coming to you from the West Coast, this is Politicos. Today is January 15th, 2026.
I'm Scott Lonebo.
And I'm Ian Bushfield. I want to say lots to talk about today, but it's the doldrums of January. It has, thankfully here, the weather has turned around. We had an atmospheric weather earlier. We had an atmospheric river earlier this week that was intense. And then today it was sunny and like above 10 degrees. It was just beautiful. How's the weather down there?
Same as it always is, sunny.
Yeah.
But like cold sunny, which is about typical for this time of year. On there, thankfully spared the atmospheric river, though I would not complain about more snow on the mountains, but like they're a decent level right now, so skiing so far has been good once we actually got some snow.
God, I so need to get out to the mountains. At very least, I get to celebrate tomorrow night as I turn fucking 40 years old. I don't
Congrats,
like the
happy
number.
Birthday.
Thank you. I'm going to have a very good time throwing myself a video dance party a la a high school dance, but with a keg. It's great. I'm mad you can't be there.
Yeah, disappointed to miss it, but hopefully it's a great time.
But today we get to talk about the BC Conservative leadership candidates who are entering the race, the BC Green leadership candidates who fundraised in their race, the Centre BC leadership drama, because why not? Everyone needs to have their little bit of time.
I think they were feeling left out, that they also didn't have an uprising within their party.
An attempted coup. And Bart Carney goes to China, and a little bit more. Support the show and get access to the Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Let's start with the BC Conservative leadership race. This is one of the fastest predictions I've made that has gone off the rails already, as Diane Watts has announced she is supporting Ian Black's leadership campaign. So she will most likely not be winning the leadership.
Although, considering my Cuba prediction had some movement on it this week, I consider that missed prediction to be better news than the one that I think, disappointingly, I think I might actually get this year.
So Ian Black, former BC Liberal cabinet minister under Gordon Campbell, is now, was he a cabinet minister under Christy Clark as well? He's forgettable. No offense to him, but like in a good way, I guess. In like, he didn't have scandals. He was just relatively competent as a minister. And so no one noticed him. I mean, some people obviously noticed him, but.
Yeah, part of the challenge, though, is you actually do need to get attention. He ended his time in cabinet in 2011, so no on the Christy Clark aspect. And actually, he actually ran in Christie's seat after Christie stepped down in Port Moody, interesting fact. But yeah, Campbell era cabinet minister, kind of long time person in the BC Liberal Party. Like you said, not a huge profile. I think it's one of those things where, if you mention the name, a lot of people be like, yeah, I kind of remember him, but not sure is going to have the stature to do anything but like an organization heavy campaign that, leans pretty hard on the old BC Liberal network, because I don't think he has the juice to do kind of a organic grassroots get a bunch of attention and get a bunch of people excited about you and sign up for the party and win that way type of campaign.
Yeah, I think he could win it, but it would be the way like
Andrew
Andrew Wilkinson won it, or even to some extent Kevin Falcon, and that's not a great path to premiership, apparently. But maybe it will work for Ian. On his team are some prominent people. He's, like I mentioned, Diane Watts is supporting him, as well as former MP and Trade Minister Ed Fast and MLA Teresa Watt. And his campaign is being run by Dimitri Panazopoulos, who has worked on all kinds of campaigns, as well as for former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, former BC Premier Christy Clark and Andrew Wilkinson, and many others across the country. Kind of one of those conservative operatives who gets around. The other conservative operative who gets around is Corey Tenaik, who is running the Caroline Elliott campaign, as that is officially launching as well, which comes as very little surprise.
Oh, completely unsurprising. The only surprising thing about this is it seems like he kind of front ran the announcement by mentioning it on the Curse of Politics podcast, in which he's a panelist. It's like it was an open secret she was running, but don't think there was any official confirmation until he offhandedly mentioned it in the podcast, which is a hell of a way to launch a leadership campaign, to have your campaign manager put it out there like that.
Honestly surprising that Stephen Carter has never let that slip on the strategists, whoever. He's pretty good at
soft launched one on that, but like softer launch than hey, I'm campaign manager here.
So yeah, I think we talked about Caroline Elliott before, so we don't need to get too much into her. And Peter Millibar is having a special announcement tomorrow on his conservative vision for BC that also says "Ready to lead BC" under his name logo, wordmark, I guess, and a picture of him. And yeah. So I don't know. I guess Millibar and Black will be filling the moderate role. Caroline Elliott is kind of an interesting. I have to figure out where exactly she positions herself, because in some of her columns she's aiming for that moderate role, and other stuff she is like a sharp critic of reconciliation, as the headline of the Vancouver Sun describes her. And then we might still get a few more, like Harman Bangu and others, who will lean harder on the populist front. The only other kind of notable name is the Independent Contractor and Builders Association, ICBA of BC. Their president, Chris Gardner, is not running, for those who were watching him, namely namely Jordan Bateman is disappointed.
Yeah, there've been some rumors on that, but I don't think there's anything ever all that serious about him as a potential candidate beyond just some speculation on it.
The ICBA is one of those groups that's perpetually critical of the NDP, even when they're building things. It's fascinating. But yeah, I think going from full leading, it's kind of like the challenge Rob Ashton is having for the federal NDP, right? Is going from outside the party, maybe you're strong in a union or a private association, to getting into politics at the top. It's a tough jump. Yeah. It can be done. It has been done, but so we'll come back to the conservative race, I don't know, next week, in a couple weeks, as stuff starts to shape up. Eventually the party needs to tell us how this race is going to run, and timing, formats,
the financial requirement, all that. Get nomination packages out to the candidates. It would not surprise me if several people are kind of waiting to see what the shape of it is before deciding to jump in, because how big the number that you have to raise and how much time you have to do it can really shape the course of a race, where a lot of money and a quick time really narrows it down to just a few front runners, where if you have a long lead time and not as much on the money needed, it can be the case where a lot more people will toss their hat in because the barriers are lower, and it's even if you don't win, or can be a profile raiser, or like Andrew Wilkinson, you can in a big crowded field kind of come up the middle and slowly build enough votes in each of the rounds of the runoff voting that an outside shot can actually work in those cases.
Indeed. So I'd love to have any sense of what they're thinking, but I bet they're also talking to each of the candidates or people considering it and trying to find something that's hopefully fair.
Yeah.
And also good for the party, I guess.
Well, the other thing is, the BC Conservatives have existed for a while, but up until a few years ago, they were a, rump of a party that there were just a few people keeping the lights on and then, maybe running a candidate or two in a couple ridings. They've not actually had to run a leadership race of this magnitude for literal decades, and some of it is going to have to be the case where they're going to have to figure it out on how to do that. I'm sure there's a lot of challenges in that, and some of it'll be like experienced political hands came over when things reformed, or the right of center reformed around the Conservative Party and whatnot. You'll get some people with federal experience and whatnot, but overall, it's a case where there's not the institutional memory on how to do that. So that's probably part of what's taking some time too.
Yes. Well,
which also means, this one perhaps more than others, there's a chance for things to go a little off the rails too. So that could also be potentially exciting as we see how it pans out.
Oh yeah. In a party as spicy as this, I can imagine the allegations coming hard and fast if this looks like a blowout. Hell, the federal Conservatives had that come up with the Patrick Brown campaign in the last leadership race, even as Pierre Poilievre ran away with it. So lots to watch in the next couple months. Over at the Green Party, we now have a sense of how their leadership ran, as Election BC has released the financing reports for the three candidates. This is very unexciting when it's a small number of candidates for a small party, but we now, just to break this down before I get too deep in the numbers, all of these candidates report some amount of direct contributions they received, which is relatively low, and then significantly more in transfers from the party. And it seems most likely those transfers are people said, hey, I like Jonathan Kerr. I'm going to donate through the party's website to him. And that on the books became the party transfers money to him. But now we don't know who his donors are because those are on the BC Green Party list of donors rather than on Jonathan Kerr's return. So, for example, Adam Bremner Aikens reports raising only $611 from 4 people, but he also got $5,000 in transfers. We don't know who those are from his report. And that feels like not the ideal way to account for your money.
No, because I believe it's $100, $200. I can't remember where the cutoff is on the provincial level disclosures, but after a certain dollar amount, the names have to be publicly reported on there. And if I remember right, looking at these financial disclosures in the past for parties, there's not a line in the report table for the donors to put donated through the party to this leadership candidate. So potentially, it just goes into a bit of a black box on that.
In any case, $5,600 raised by Adam Bremner Aikens, combining all the numbers together, $36,500 roughly for Jonathan Kerr and $83,400 for Emily Lowen. So she raised roughly double the other two combined, which isn't surprising given she won with 60% of the vote. It actually maps pretty well, dollars to votes in this case, not saying money buys votes, but it did kind of correspond. People signing up are the ones who voted for each of them. That threshold is $250 is your name gets reported in BC, by the way. So We know 99 donors to Emily Lowen. Some fraction of them, I don't have it in front of me, were over 250. A lot of them were also named Lowen, so family members, but also a lot of donors to the party itself. So no surprise there. Unfortunately, we don't have many other leadership races to compare this to recently because the NDP didn't have a leadership race recently. So we'd have to go back to Kevin Falcon's leadership race to have a comparable back in 2022. Yeah, I don't have that in front of me. I thought I could pull it up quick from Wikipedia, but they had to spend $45,000 just to get in the race. So by that number, only one of these people gets in the race.
Yeah, be the leadership race on your first now one. That would probably be the best comparator on that. But if I remember, the dollar amounts were sub 100,000. Dream Party leadership races aren't a huge fundraising bonanza for the most part. 83K is, as a result, pretty respectable haul for a party that size. Indeed.
Just for reference, Sonia Furstenau raised $62,000 in 2020 for her leadership race. So Emily Lowen was a little bit over that. Notably, 59,000 of that was direct contributions and 2,500 were transfers. So at least then it was a little easier to track the money. Centre BC, the party that exists that we always like to forget about.
Well, forget about them would imply we like to forget about them would imply we're, actively trying to do that, as opposed to them being just such a non-entity. It doesn't occur to us to think about them, until they have a splinter faction that puts a press release in our inbox and we are reminded they exist.
So a group of Centre BC members, just reading straight from the start of this, are calling for the resignation of leader Karen Kirkpatrick, President Mike Wignall, and Vice President Petra Currit, citing what they describe as a pattern of decisions that have undermined party governance, member participation, internal accountability, and electoral viability. This is an anonymous statement because they are afraid of retaliation if they speak openly.
Retaliation? How? It's a party that has...
They'll be kicked out of the party that has no power.
Yeah, has no power, is almost certainly never going to have power, and if it, does anything to alienate the dozen members it has, is only sowing the seeds of its own destruction. And what's the worst that you could possibly happen here? You don't get to run for a party that is going to be lucky if it gets 2% of the vote next election?
In addition to the anonymous or confidential sources, who we've not reached out to, although they offered, they also have statements from past President Carol Fielding and past administrator, I forget, didn't read exactly what her role was, but Julie Brandsema, who also have resigned, citing frustrations with the party. In response to this, Karen Kirkpatrick released her own statement denying these allegations that are in here and asking everyone to be more respectful and focus on thoughtful centrist solutions for British Columbia. I don't know. I don't know that this is worth spending too much time on. It's just
it's funny,
amusing.
Yeah, because it was always such a long shot the party was going to go anywhere. And now that they've decided to, follow in apparently every other party's steps and have a dissatisfied faction trying to mutiny on it, it's just, I don't know, turns the thing into a farce.
Yeah. Anyway, I guess it's the Greens' turn next, or who knows, maybe the Libertarians. In more substantive news, this has kind of been expected for a few weeks now, but the province of BC made it official that they will not be asking the government of Canada to extend the decriminalization pilot with a statement from Minister Josie Osborne saying, "Despite the hard work and good intentions behind this pilot, it has not delivered the results we hoped for. For that reason, we are not asking the federal government to renew the exemption." It goes on to say, we're building a complete and comprehensive system of mental health, and we're doing a bunch of other work in supporting police and all that. We're just not doing this. Which isn't really surprising. They haven't really been committed
been on the wall
to
for a while on this one.
Yeah. Pretty much since Eby became premier and started to roll back the extent of the decriminalization program, and then it basically just like anytime we got asked about it seemed shamed. It's like didn't want to kill it early, but I think for me the frustrating thing is talking about it didn't deliver the results we hoped for, but they don't quantify that in any way. Like, it was a pilot project, so in theory there should be reporting. There was a reporting dashboard. What were the metrics they were hoping for, and how much did this miss by? Or is this just purely a vibes thing, which is my suspicion?
So the BC government has been producing quarterly reports that they send to Ottawa. These are not well publicized, and you have to kind of go hunting for them to find them, which does have some data on there. The most recent one from August notes that that unregulated drug deaths have basically been stable with some fluctuations since 2021, and that, well, there has been some decrease recently that's also occurred North America wide, so it's hard to assign any changes to the decriminalization program. They also have some data in there about police arrests, drug seizures, that sort of thing. It follows the pattern that you'd more or less expect, where during the first phase of it, it dipped when they tightened some of the rules around locations where people were permitted to possess and use drugs. That increased back up a bit, and it's now kind of more or less at the point where it was before the pilot project on there. So annoyingly, a lot of this stuff was not particularly well publicized, but looking over the highlights of the reports, it's not a huge change, particularly once they made the changes back in 2024 on that. And just I disagree a little bit on your characterization with respect to David Eby. He became premier before this rolled out. No, sorry, actually. Yeah, he became premier in 2022, so the application been filed, but the actual program hadn't rolled out until January of the next year. And the BC government at the time was very supportive of it. Came out swinging against any critics of it. To even suggest that there might be some problems with how they'd designed it, or things they hadn't properly considered. There was, accusations that, the criticisms weren't in good faith, that it was, motivated because the people making the criticisms wanted to see addicts dead, etc. And that held for quite a while until there started to be public some pretty serious changes in public opinion on that, and there started to be a significant reversal on how the public was perceiving the pilot project, and that's when Eby changed his attitude on it. But early on, it was nothing but this is great. We want to see it work. We're fully in support of it.
It did feel, in my recollection, that it was something Kennedy Stewart kind of called for, And it's very funny. I saw an article about him coming out and criticizing the government for not doing it right at this point. Not that I think his proposal was particularly stronger or better. I think it was similar, but I think it had slightly lower exemptions proposed. There was some like small nuance to that. I
think the
don't have
threshold
it
for possession before under it was higher under his. It's like how much a person could have in their possession was more than the 2.5 grams that the federal government approved.
Yeah, but he pitched it. John Horgan ran with it, and then EB inherited it and did all right. I'll concede, have it there didn't kill it right away. But like once those changes came in, the effect of it was the decriminalization really only applied within your own home. And I don't think it was ever a big issue that police are arresting people for possession in their homes, because police don't have the right to just enter your home without suspicion or cause. So there has to be some reason for them to be there before they're arresting you. And like decriminalization was basically dead after that. And
well, it's, I think, worth remembering that was the second change. So there was the first one where it was the exceptions were K-12 school premises, licensed childcare facilities, airport Coast Guard vessels and helicopters, and motor vehicles or watercraft. And that was what was in place in January of 2023 when it came in. The moves to reduce that came September of that year, where they added within 15 meters of playgrounds, spray parks, wading pools, skate parks on there. And it wasn't until the following May where it got restricted down to private residents, designated overdose prevention sites, health clinics, that sort of thing. So there was a fair bit of runway on that, and it was largely, in response to kind of what was seen on the ground and what the public reaction to it was, and kind of incrementally changed on that rather than going full right to only personal residences pretty quickly.
I think what will be interesting to watch from here is how the narrative develops and what understandings, learnings, and academic research comes out of this. There's a piece we'll link to in Canadian Affairs that talks about like framing this as what Canada failed to learn from drug decriminalization in Portugal. And there's going to be lots of pieces like that I think will be interesting to follow, and we don't need to hash out all of those debates right here, right now. But it is frustrating to see a pilot project kind of just fizzle out without real, like the government statement is so disappointing because it doesn't really it just doesn't say why they're ending it, other than they need to be pushed harder. Like, why specifically did they think it ended? Was it the public drug use for them? Like that's an argument I could at least understand, even if I don't fully agree that the decriminalization was fully tied to that. But that's like, give me something, Minister Osborne, not just we got bored.
Yeah,
we got hammered over it, and we don't want to be hammered over this anymore.
I suspect it really was the public drug use and public disorder issues that surrounded it that ended up being the thing that ended up doing it in politically. And yeah, that's where you started the pushback. The first point where they started to where there was a real change in direction was after that. I believe it was the nurses union started to raise workplace safety issues around workplace violence from people who were intoxicated with drugs. And that's kind of where things started to lose the public. There'd been people raising concerns for a while, but that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back on it, and where for lack of a better term, the vibes on this shifted from largely supportive to serious concerns over how it was going. And where I think like the original error in all of this was not taking those public order, public drug use concerns seriously. And at the time when this was being considered and the program was being put together, there was a pretty dismissive reaction from both the government and particularly advocates around those concerns. And link back to the Portugal model that gets held up a lot, is those are aspects that Portugal took quite seriously, and in crafting their policy had specific ways in there to address. For example, public drug use in Portugal remains illegal, and police are much more involved in the actual application of the program on the ground than it was in BC, and where police got consulted on how it was going to be implemented and whatnot. But the definite direction and what the intent was of this, as it was communicated at the time, was very much we want to keep the police involvement in this to an absolute minimum. Police interactions are part of the problem, and as such, I didn't really do a great job of fully bringing them in on this.
I mean, public drug use remained illegal in Canada. The decriminalization didn't, as far as I understood, was only of possession, and didn't, like, the hospital issue could have easily been dealt with because you didn't have to let people hold their drugs in hospitals, or you could just say, hey, drug use is illegal in the hospital, or so a lot of things got conflated, which was frustrating, and the government really struggled to actually articulate the nuance. I think there was efforts to bring police in. There were efforts to try to train police, but those trainings didn't move very quickly. I saw some reporting that, they did get a chunk of officers trained, but it was not all of them, not right away for sure. And that's never going to happen, but that became a clear issue. And so, I don't know. The whole thing kind of feels like they half-assed it and it failed, and now we can just say decriminalization is a bad idea. But it's like, well, half-assing anything can be a bad idea.
Yeah, they definitely...
Well, maybe not anything, but like a lot of things. If you half-ass them, they don't work well. And then, well, is it the fault of the thing you tried, or is it the fault that you just fucked it up? And there's no accountability here on that. They're just like, oh, well.
Yeah, they definitely half-assed it. And I think part of that was, even as it was conceived on like the BC implementation of it, it was much more of like a laissez-faire, hands-off decriminalization approach compared to the Portugal one, which is a much more hands-on, often being characterized as a somewhat paternalistic one, where it's non-carceral in its responses to drug use, but it is very much not a hands-off response. People caught in possession of drugs there do get diverted into various treatment programs. There's I believe they're called dissuasion commissions that are made up of healthcare professionals and other related experts, where people get sent to and have to appear before when they get caught with in possession of drugs. And, stuff like that just didn't end up in the BC pilot program. And by trying to really focus just on we're going to reduce police interactions, charges and drug seizures, they kind of missed the bigger picture on it. And as a result, the public support for it just dried up. And I suppose one way to characterize this half-assed in it, the other way to characterize it is, was a flawed conception of what effective decriminalization would look like from the start. But like I said, hasn't been a huge amount of introspection on this from the government side, or also the advocate side.
I don't think that's fair. The advocates, there are advocates who criticize this program from the start as half-assed and ineffective because for a million different reasons. I don't have the arguments in front of me, but there were critics of this thing from every step of the way.
Most of the criticism I saw is that it didn't go far enough in loosening restrictions on drug possession and drug use, rather than not having the other aspects that the Portugal system had. And I'll grant that there was some on needed more addiction treatment supports, and that's absolutely a fair one. But in terms of the strength at which people caught in possession are directed towards addiction treatments was dramatically different than Portugal did, and all the advocacy position taken I saw from this leaned in the direction that it needed to go even further away from the strength of what Portugal was doing into a much more hands-off approach on that, where there should be more resources just generally out there, but in terms of the moving people caught with drugs into those programs in a way that strongly pressured them and incentivized them on that, there was not a lot of support for that from what I saw from the advocacy on that.
So two last things before we can shift on. One, the positive is just looking at the unregulated drug death dashboard that the province has. The good news is that 2025, the numbers will change a little bit, but 2025 has the lowest number of unregulated drug deaths since 2020, actually since 2019, which is when things started shooting up. And 2023, 2024, 2025 are all declining. We're down to 1,538 people died last year from toxic drug overdoses, which is down from a high of 2,600 in 2023. So I don't think we can tie any one thing to any one other thing. As you mentioned, there are global trends to this as well, but that is positive, regardless of what the cause is. Fewer people dying is always better. And the second thing is drug use is a complicated issue. People have always used substances and will always continue to use substances. And I think the challenge we have and have had for the last, since declaring this a crisis, is some of those substances got really poisonous really fast in a way we haven't seen in a long time because of fentanyl and other additives. No government around the world has taken this on at the capacity needed to save those lives. And so, we're starting to see some positive trends, but there's still a lot of people dying. And doing what we can to stop people from dying would be great for any government to take on, in my opinion. In the meantime, I guess the BC government will keep doing little things here and there. I noticed they had a couple other addictions related press releases this week to, I think, try to counter the news, but no one cares. It's not to dismiss them entirely, but relatively, the news is what we just went into. For Mark Carney, though, the news is Xi Jinping is new best friend. Friendship is over with Donald Trump and America. He is in China meeting with all of the top bureaucrats, politicians, state-owned companies, and not doing the cultural visits I read in one article, like seeing the Great Wall, but really getting down to business as is his brand. All culminating with a meeting with Xi Jinping today that seemed to have resulted in Carney's favorite thing, memorandums of understanding.
Does love those memorandums of understanding. I will say the not doing a giant cultural tour and, snapping a lot of pictures for the gram is a refreshing change from his predecessor. So not going to be too critical on that one, but
the only thing with that for me is like, I don't know Chinese cultural politics enough to know if there's any issue. It seems like it was fine. So fine, whatever. But like, with diplomacy, sometimes that stuff can be important, but I guess it wasn't here. So fine, whatever. I mean, if I go to China, I want to see some sights, but I'm not prime minister, I guess.
Yeah, you have fewer other pressing concerns on your mind when you'd be traveling there. So yeah, like some signs of movement on it. There wasn't a trade deal inked or anything, but some signs that there is some movement on trade. Historically, Canada's been pretty reluctant to approve major investments in the or energy industry, for example, and seems like that's potentially changing on there. There's also some movement on China buying more BC lumber. So, potentially good for trade diversification, but still like early days. And this is a country that has historically used trade policy as a tool to get action on other areas. So it's, not a sure thing that any of this stuff's going to last either.
I think the thing challenging Carney is I bet he is reluctant to go too far too fast here, because to do so might piss off Donald Trump and create different headaches in a different direction. I think if it wasn't for Trump, he would drop the EV tariffs to get Saskatchewan canola over there tomorrow. But he knows if he does that, well, maybe not the EV tariffs because of protecting domestic jobs, but he'd probably do a stronger deal if, it didn't threaten our relationship, whatever it is, with America. But it's interesting, right? He did get some promises, like you said, around oil, uranium. He wants to sell our uranium. A lot of it was, Canada's going to... It looked like China really wanted to sell us renewables, and Canada really tried to fight to make sure we could sell them fossil fuels. And there's a irony there, climate-wise, that I find amusing. But sure, whatever. They got to talk about Canada LNG being cleaner or decarbonized, whatever that really means. I know what they mean it means, but I think overall the whole thing is just Canada's broad vibe of China is very different than it was 2 or 3 years ago. Sort of out of political necessary. It's not as harsh as when we were like, hey, they're interfering in our domestic politics. Now it's, hey, we're there begging for deals.
Well, I was actually thinking more, hey, they've kidnapped 2 of our citizens to try and strong arm us into releasing someone we've arrested for extradition. But the sense I get is that there is still a lot of reticence with China in a lot of circles. Maybe not as much in the Liberal Party, which has always been very China-friendly, but...
It is the Red Party.
In the general discourse and mood of the country, there's less China's the future, we want to hitch our wagon to that kind of percolated a lot through, say, the Trechen and Martin years, and even like early Trudeau years, and more in a, well, damn, the world's gotten a lot more nastier, and it's not a great regime there, but we're probably gonna have to keep on relations with them and do more trading with them out of necessity, which is, I think, a different energy than had being directed towards China, either during the low point of the two Michaels and the foreign interference stuff, or the optimism for the future era that preceded it.
In a 2020 poll, Ipsos Reid said that 8 in 10 Canadians wanted less trade with China. In a poll released this past week, it's now 54% want closer ties and agreements with the country. 40% are somewhat supportive, and 14% are strongly supportive, as opposed to 21% somewhat opposed and 11% strongly opposed. So it's definitely a new era, and I suspect there's also quite the partisan breakdown to that. Ipsos doesn't have it in the poll I pulled up really quickly, but it's an interesting time in foreign affairs without even getting into the whole Greenland situation that we have not sent anyone to. So,
but speak of the things that cause us to talk about elbows up. Couple MPs ended up cutting their trip to Taiwan short right before Carney landed in China, which, if we're serious about defending democracies and supporting our fellow democracies against rising authoritarian threats and whatnot, it's not a great sign to tuck tail and run against the democracy that China is being most threatening towards.
Which we consider part of China as part of Canada's One China policy since 1970.
I mean, kind of. That's what the diplomats like to say. But like in practice, we treat it as a independent country, and it's go back to the Indo-Pacific strategy, and that conflict there is something that we had concerns about, and officially we recognize there's only a single China, but in practice, our approach sees Taiwan as a polity that should maintain its independence and should not be invaded and subject to the People's Republic of China's authoritarianism or expansionism.
The Canadian MPs are Liberals Helena Jassic and Marie-France Lalonde, two Liberals who say they were informed by advice from the Canadian government to get the fuck out of Taiwan. Meanwhile, 3 Conservatives and others on the trip did not leave. So it's an interesting. The Conservatives were Adam Chambers, Shelby Cramp Newman, and Melissa Lantzman. It's tense times, I guess. The tension is always high over on X, which continues to be a website. This country has now had a little bit of a debate over this. There's a broader debate happening around the world about what do we do about this website where the AI keeps making deepfake child sexual exploitation material when people ask it to show undressed children. And because our societies are all broken, we have not arrested Elon Musk and shut down his child porn website, but instead are having awkward conversations about whether we could ban it. You have the Minister of AI, Evan Solomon in Canada, saying this is a bad website and the government needs to take action, but then quote tweeting that on X to say we are not planning to ban it, which is just a weird choice. Like, those are two statements he can make, but to put them together looks gross. This came after some news leaked in the UK that Canada was potentially joining Australia and the UK and looking at a ban on X. Politicians just like refuse to leave it. Some have. A Liberal MP from Victoria, Will Graves, posted that he's leaving X, which then got a bunch of journalists mad for some reason that he was still on Meta. And it's like, well, we can argue about Meta's news ban and whether that's a justifiable reason to leave, but like, freaking, it's a bad place. People should not be using the website. I haven't for a while. I don't have an account there anymore. I don't get why this is a debate.
Yeah, it's a mess. Don't think the UK's actually moved forward on the ban they were floating.
No one really
on
has.
That. It all seems to have kind of stalled out. Discussions got publicly aired that Eds had announced they're changing their AI policies to remove those abilities, so like it may end up just may end up correcting the issue, although there really should be like some kind of sanction for that having happened. Like complying after the fact really does not alleviate the responsibility for letting it get to that place afterwards, but at least small victory there, I guess.
Yeah, like I didn't like the TikTok ban, and ultimately I think for consistency I don't like the idea of banning X entirely, but at very least, morally there's no reason to be there. There's no reason for the government to be there or to have government accounts on there. So we could start taking those away, and that's all consistent. Like they stopped government devices from having TikTok. That's fine. You can do that. We don't know what Elon's doing with that data. It's probably not good. Man, it's such a self-perpetuating mess.
Anyway. It's one of those things where like you really see the network effects and the challenges of migrating to a new thing, because a lot of people stick around there because that's where everyone else is, and there's been efforts to move to Mastodon and later Blue Sky, and the latter I think being a more successful attempt. You still haven't hit those critical masses yet, so it's just ends up resulted in once the network effects lean towards one way, it's actually just ends up being a really annoying coordination problem. And yeah, governments taking some action to do that might shift things a bit, because part of the reason all the journalists are on Twitter and now that's where all the politicians were, and it just was one place. But you start to scatter everything out, and it just becomes the case where even with the reduced user base, there's still more of those discussions going on Twitter/X than there is on the other ones, and it just is a hard problem that short of an outright ban, it's not an easy way to actually force that kind of migration.
Yeah. I mean, one of the reasons I stopped posting work stuff at Twitter when it started to go downhill, this was a couple years ago now, is because it just wasn't effective. Like the website had killed traffic so much that the stuff I was posting there didn't get engaged with. It didn't drive traffic. I was like, well, this is a pointless website. It's not actually engaging conversation. I would still have engagement personally, but it took work to do that, and it was unpleasant. So I just stopped, and professionally we're doing great. So I don't need that communication channel, but people convince themselves they do because it feels good to get a retweet.
Yeah, also if you're doing professional politics, you should probably spend way less time on Twitter than you do, because not only does just the dynamics of these short-form text-based apps, regardless of which one they are, result in echo chambers, very unrepresentative samples, the the dopamine hits of the likes and retweets give you an distorted impression of the popularity on it. Even at its peak, I think Twitter had something like 15, maybe 20% of people were on it. So you're already getting a pretty truncated sample. It skews way towards like the power users that are just constantly posting on there rather than, what the rank and file or, the typical person thinks. It's just like in general a distorted view. And honestly, there's a lot of things you can point to in politics in a lot of different places on a lot of different questions and sides of the political spectrum where just the dynamics of social media has just warped perceptions and led to some like pretty unhealthy things for politics, government, society overall.
Well, one place where you can have a little bit longer form discussions, though no one has ever described it as a positive website, is Reddit. And Reddit AMAs are actually the Ask Me Anythings, kind of a useful way to get some good responses. There are positives to Reddit.
Yeah, I will defend Reddit on the fact that it's very community specific. If it's one of like the default subreddits that you're automatically subscribed to when you create an account, it's probably going to be trash. But there are some like niche communities on there. I don't use Reddit all that much these days, but for a long time, fairly active on the art handle politics one. That was a great place for discussion on there. The few times I've dipped my toes in since, it's not as good as it used to be, which is a little disappointing, but it is what it is.
Yeah, one of those communities is our NDP, and the moderators there organized an Ask Me Anything with a couple of the leadership candidates. They had Tony McQuail. They had Rob Ashton. They promoted it. They got a bunch of questions in there, and then it came time, and he sat down at his computer. Well, actually, what it turns out happened is his campaign team sat down at ChatGPT and copy-pasted answers in for him, which he did not vet. And what people saw was this AMA where really vague, kind of pointless answers kept coming from Rob Ashton, and someone like looked closely at these and he's like, I think these are AI. And then CBC News went and asked Rob Ashton, did you use AI to respond to your AMA? And he's like, well, I was on the road, so I wasn't able to do this thing, which, let's remember, he had scheduled and planned to do. And his campaign team took it over and slopped it up. And
which is just a complete cell phone. So for people who are unfamiliar with Reddit culture, a successful AMA is one in which you get a pretty unfiltered, genuine response to it. And the ones that go sideways, and it's almost guaranteed to go sideways if you do this, are the ones where it's clear like the person is phoning it in, filtering themselves,
copy pasting from their website or whatever.
Copy pasting, having somebody write answers for them. Like a good AMA, you should be able to get a sense of the personality of the person doing it when it's done well. And
yeah, they might only spend an hour and get like 5 questions answered, but they're more interesting answers than, oh, look, he answered 25, 30 questions, but they're garbage.
Yeah,
and meaningless.
So like one of the basic skills of any politician is to know your audience and know the venue you're going to, and very clearly did not, because anyone with like a passing familiarity with Reddit and the AMA culture there would tell you this was a terrible way to do it, and it's just a self-own on the Ashton campaign's part. And I don't know, like, how do you strip the little things like this so badly? And that's even before you get into the whole AI thing, which Ashton and other NDPers have been pretty critical of on the it will replace people's jobs and
has a terrible environmental impact. And
yeah, but like specifically on this one, it was being used to cut out the work of someone else, which is, just a bad on a symbolic level.
Yeah. Anyway, it sounded like Tony McQuail's was good. I didn't always agree with his answers, but I thought it's just a good contrast there. And that has been Politicos. Find links to everything we talked about at politicos.ca. Support the show and get access to our exclusive Slack channel at patreon.com/politicos. Our intro music is Beautiful British Columbia by Serge Plotnikov. Politicos is a production of Leg and Boot Media. Audio editing provided by Jesse Woodward at listener-supported CHLY 101.7 FM in Nanaimo. Learn more at chly.ca.